Hi everyone, welcome back to the channel. In today's video, we will be diving into the collapse of the Russian economy and how it's being affected by Ukraine's recent military actions. From drone attacks on oil refineries to growing financial pressures, Russia's stability is being tested like never before. Stay tuned as we explore the key factors that could lead to the disintegration of Russia and what it means for the future of the region.
Recently, it was announced that the Russian economy, according to the Central Bank of Russia, is on the verge of collapse. In an unprecedented move, the bank has raised the key interest rate from 18% to 19%. This is the highest rate since the Russian invasion of Ukraine in February 2022, reflecting a profound financial crisis that mirrors the chaos seen in the early days of the war. But what does this steep rate hike really mean for Russia's economy? In simple terms, the situation is dire. The increase in interest rates signifies that the actions of the central bank, the Russian government, and President Vladimir Putin are failing to contain skyrocketing inflation. Inflation in Russia is spiraling out of control, growing at an unsustainable rate. When the interest rate was raised from 16% to 18% earlier this summer, Russian officials claimed this would deliver a decisive blow to inflation. They promised that the higher rate would decapitate inflation, causing it to collapse. Yet, the opposite has occurred. Inflation is not only alive but thriving. For a healthy economy, high inflation is a severe problem. For a weak, war-torn economy like Russia's, it is catastrophic. In simple terms, high inflation makes production within the economy unprofitable. No matter how much you invest in production, the costs will outweigh the returns. As inflation rises, it becomes more financially logical to sell off assets and relocate to more stable markets than to continue operating in a shrinking economy. Here's an analogy. If we think of the economy as a living organism, money acts as the bloodstream, circulating essential nutrients throughout. Inflation, however, functions like internal bleeding. It drains the economy, releasing money into useless endeavors that do not contribute to growth. Severe inflation can debilitate the system to the point of collapse, and in the case of Russia, this collapse seems increasingly inevitable. Central banks typically respond to inflation by raising interest rates, which is essentially a tourniquet to slow the economic bleeding. However, Russia's central bank is not addressing the root cause of the problem, the war. The war in Ukraine and the military-industrial complex supporting it are the tumors sucking the life out of Russia's economy. While the central bank tightens the tourniquet on Russia's non-military sectors, the war machine continues to expand unchecked, consuming ever larger amounts of resources. Every time the central bank raises interest rates, it does so at the expense of the civilian economy, leaving industries starved of the financial support they need to function. Meanwhile, military spending only increases. This economic triage approach is unsustainable. The central bank's attempts to control inflation are akin to treating cancer with band-aids. The real problem, unchecked military spending, remains untreated. In the short term, the bank's measures might slow down the rate of collapse, but without addressing the war's financial drain, Russia's civilian economy will continue to wither. The longer the conflict drags on, the more Russia will resemble economically devastated countries like Zimbabwe or Argentina, which experienced hyperinflation and eventual economic ruin. The worst-case scenario for Russia is stagflation, a combination of high inflation and stagnant production. Stagflation signifies a sick economy, one where prices rise uncontrollably, but economic output plummets. Russian economists and financial experts now openly acknowledge this possibility. According to a recent report by Russia's Ministry of Economic Development, the country is headed for an economic overcooling in 2025. This means a sharp drop in industrial production, income and investment. If current trends continue, Russia's civilian economy could be entirely paralyzed by 2025. The central bank, led by Elvira Nabiullina, has already warned that stagflation is the most significant threat to Russia's economic future. In simple terms, this means that even as inflation keeps rising, production will shrink, leading to a dramatic decrease in the availability of goods and services. Russia has long relied on oil exports to stabilize its budget, but even this lifeline is slipping away. The global oil market is in decline, and Russian oil exports have been hit particularly hard. Just this week, Bloomberg reported that the price of Russia's Urals crude oil dropped below $60 per barrel for the first time this year. This price drop is a critical blow, as $60 is considered the pain threshold for Russia's economy. If oil prices fall below this level, Russia struggles to break even, meaning its budget will no longer balance. Over the last 2 weeks, the price of Russian oil has fallen by $12, or 18%. This collapse in oil revenue is devastating for the federal budget, which depends heavily on oil income to fund government spending, including military expenditures. Without higher oil prices, Russia faces a severe shortfall in its budget, further fueling inflation and economic instability. Several factors are driving down the value of Russian oil. First, China's economy, the largest buyer of Russian oil, is slowing. China's once booming demand for energy has stagnated, with much of the country's vehicle market now transitioning to electric cars. As China reduces its oil consumption, Russia's market shrinks. India, the other major buyer of Russian oil, also faces reduced demand, leaving Russia with few options for its oil exports. Secondly, global oil production, especially in the United States, is increasing. As the US ramps up its production of shale oil, it weakens the impact of OPEC's production cuts, which were designed to prop up oil prices. Middle Eastern producers are now reluctantly increasing output to maintain their revenue, further driving down prices. Russia, on the other hand, is unable to increase its oil production due to sanctions and the withdrawal of Western oil companies and technology. Russian oil extraction is difficult and expensive, particularly in the harsh environments of Siberia. With Western investment and technology gone, Russia cannot maintain, let alone increase, its oil production capacity. The result is that Russia is forced to sell less oil at lower prices, further eroding its revenue. Sanctions imposed by the US and its allies are playing a critical role in Russia's economic decline. In April 2024, the US introduced secondary sanctions targeting countries that help Russia circumvent existing restrictions. These sanctions have been highly effective in cutting off Russia from global trade, particularly with China, its largest economic partner. American sanctions now make it exceedingly difficult for Chinese companies to trade with Russia without facing severe penalties. In response, Chinese businesses are increasingly wary of doing business with Russia, understanding that the risks outweigh the rewards. This is especially true in sectors vital to Russia's military and technological capabilities, where the loss of Chinese imports has left the Russian military-industrial complex struggling to replace critical components. Every month, the US tightens these sanctions, further isolating Russia from the global economy. With dwindling oil revenues, skyrocketing inflation, and a civilian economy on life support, Russia's financial future looks bleak. International financial experts predict that by 2025, Russia's economy will face a collapse similar to the 1998 default, which nearly bankrupted the country. The difference now is that Russia is locked into a costly, unwinnable war, draining resources at an alarming rate. Despite the central bank's attempts to patch the gaping wounds, Russia's economic crisis is set to deepen. The war, inflation, and declining oil revenues are all symptoms of a larger, systemic problem, a government unwilling to make the hard choices necessary to save its economy. As long as the Kremlin prioritizes war over economic reform, Russia's economy will continue its downward spiral. The question now is not if Russia's economy will collapse, but when. And as the world watches, the clock is ticking.